This week's documentary, A Death in January, recollects some of the life and times of Sean Burke, the Limerick-born adventurer, writer and jailbreaker who died 2 years ago. The programme is presented by Kevin O'Connor. A Death in January.
And so, of course, I'm terribly relieved. But at the same time, I'll say this, that I'm not at all surprised by the verdict. If they had decided otherwise and sent me back to England, then in my view, the extradition treaty that exists between Ireland and England would be meaningless, because it expressly provides protection for a person accused of a political offence. And if rescuing a spy from prison is not political, then I don't know what is.
What are you going to do now?
Well, the story of the escape has been written in book form, and my agent is coming over from London in 2 weeks' time, and I understand that he's taking the manuscript to New York to have it published in America first. And he has, on the strength of reading this manuscript, he has urged me to continue writing, and in fact I have finished the second book, and I have plans for a third one. I hope to make a career in writing.
Sean Burke in Dublin, February 1969, after the High Court hearing which disallowed the application of the British authorities to have him extradited to Britain to face charges in connection with the escape of George Blake. Burke had arrived back from Moscow to Ireland to Shannon Airport on the 22nd of October 1968, the second anniversary of the escape of George Blake.
When I arrived at Shannon Airport yesterday, I had in my wallet precisely $40 American given to me in Moscow by the KGB to cover my traveling expenses to Shannon. Apart from that, absolutely nothing. And if any suggestion had been made to me that some secret account in a Swiss bank might be arranged for me, and this had been hinted earlier on, I would have turned it down flat, because I have no desire to put myself in the role of a paid Soviet agent.
So what do you do? Why, first of all, do you come back to Ireland with no obvious prospect?
The one, I desire to be in the one country where I know that I shall be happy and certainly safe. And if an Irishman is not safe and secure in Ireland, then for heaven's sake, where is he safe?
Where indeed, but from himself and his own. This is the story of a boy who grew up in a tough part of a city. The boy became an adolescent of quick wits. The adolescent became a man, with terms of Borsal behind him. And the man, while a prisoner in Wormwood Scrubs and editor of the prison magazine, organised the escape of George Blake, then a senior officer in the British intelligence services. Blake was jailed for 42 years for treason, having in his time betrayed crucial Western security information to the Russian KGB. The boy who became the man was never a communist as such, nor part of any system that cushioned his own welfare. The boy who became the great escaper afterwards went to Russia, found it more oppressive than an English jail, returned home, but could never quite shake off that early wound, not with drink or money or notoriety, or, being a hero in his own place, could not shake off the wound of whatever happened growing up. His later life, after his return to this country, was one of despair and disintegration. He squandered £100,000, a celebrity, become a derelict, a curving back to that murky twilight world of the castaway, which had been his earliest excitement. He died on a lonely country road under the open sky, with less than £2 in his pocket. Whatever else may be said about him, his life and his death were his own.
This is Fox Michael calling Baker Charlie. Fox Michael calling Baker Charlie. Come in, please. Over.
Baker Charlie calling Fox Michael. Baker Charlie calling Fox Michael. Can you hear me? Come in, please.
The recordings you're about to hear were made by Sean Burke in the course of communicating with George Blake, over the 20-foot-high wall of Wormwood Scrubs in October 1966 by walkie-talkie radio. The recording reveals the arrangements being made to effect the escape, while Burke was outside the prison, having been released from there some months previously. Burke does not refer to that recording in his book, The Springing of George Blake. He kept it as evidence of his own part in the escape and to refute critics after his death who may have claimed that he did not do what he claimed that he did do. The tool, incidentally, referred to as a small car jack which Burke had caused to be smuggled into Blake to break the struts of the window on the prison landing in the event Blake broke the struts with a kick, scaled the wall and was spirited away by Burke. And incidentally, you will hear Blake's Dutch accent becoming prominent, and the references to "stone walls do not a prison make" are from an English poet which both of them were studying while in prison. Here is the recording.
This is Fox Michael calling Baker Charlie. Fox Michael calling Baker Charlie. Come in, please. Over.
Baker Charlie calling Fox Michael. Baker Charlie calling Fox Michael. Can you hear me? Come in, please.
Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. Over.
I am innocent and quiet. Take this for a hermitage. Over.
Richard Lovelace must have been a fool. Over.
Or maybe just a dreamer. Over.
Well, now, my friend, obviously the first question I must ask you is this. Did you receive the tools? And if so, are they suitable? Over.
We did not receive it. Only the handle was found near the appointed place and the cutters, but not the jack itself. It wasn't there. So that is the position at the moment. Over.
Well, this is very regrettable. I'm meeting him again tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. That's the earliest I can discover why you haven't had him. Over.
Do you know where he put the jack? Because it wasn't with the other stuff.
Burke tried to settle in Dublin, but found the pull of his own notoriety and the push of his own inner demons too much to cope with. After several incidents, involving on one occasion the possession of a gun, which he said he needed for protection from some unnamed people, and after many forays of drunken excess, he returned to Limerick, to the city where he had grown up, to that formative place where his deviant energies had first flowered. Joe Malone knew him.
We were about 12 years of age in John the Baptist. I would be a little bit older than Sean, but that didn't make any great difference because in the school, each school teacher, our teacher of course then was John Swift, George Swift was his correct name. He taught two classes, 4th and 5th. Sean was in a lower class than me. Because Sean, you see, came from the Christian Brothers in Sexton Street because he didn't go to school there. He was a problem child, like myself. I went to Cray Lane and I didn't go to school in Cray Lane. And so it was either go to John the Baptist or Glyn. Actually, John the Baptist was a school for bad boys, if you like, for troublesome street urchins.
Were Sean and yourself both convicted of offences then at that age?
No, Sean was convicted of a very minor offence. I think it was a couple of bananas or so, and I was actually never seriously convicted. I was brought to court for the stealing of 11 apples. I remember the exact amount, because there were 4 of us there and we could not share the 11 apples equally. But we were caught outside the Burma Road. Of course, I know we have 2 Burma Roads in Limerick. There was one uptown and one in the Ennis Road. We were actually caught in the Burma Road with the 11 apples, and we were brought to court. And brought in front of District Justice Mary Flood, I will not forget his name, and only for the people we stole the apples from, who were actually a Protestant minister, Church of Ireland minister, he spoke for us. We would have been sent away. But my other three pals with me were eventually sent away.
So you knew Sean Burke then and John the Baptist. What kind of young fellow was he?
He was a big, soft young man then, you know. He didn't, of course, you see, the school was full of characters, and it was very difficult to stick out. Everybody was a character. You came in late and you went home, and you didn't go. Sometimes we may only go to school once a week, and they didn't pay much attention to us, you see. But Sean he didn't really stick out except for his big head of curly hair and his big broad smile, and he was a very soft young man then. Never showed any sign of aggression or arrogance, and stayed very much by himself.
And he was about 12 years of age.
Just about 12, yeah. We had a little band in the school, and we would march in and out of the school at lunch breaks in single file, and we had flageolets and a little drum and a cymbals and a clapper, and Sean would lead a band in playing the clappers. A big, hefty young man, and he led a class in every day, and that's when I first met Sean Burke. I didn't meet Sean Burke then again until I had read about him.
What number of years passed?
Oh, I suppose 36 years, I would say, near enough to it. This I remember well, because Sean Burke had difficulty in getting a flat, you know, in Limerick. I know the estate agent he went into, and when Sean Burke's name was mentioned as the occupier of a few flats, Sean Burke didn't get a flat. They would not give him a flat. So
why was that?
Well, his name, of course, you see, he had appeared on television and on radio and on the newspapers, and this famous man who sprang George Blake. So it was at that time then that he went to live in the country, in the Irish cottages. I had a pub in Limerick, as you know, and Sean was one of my best customers, and he was always very entertaining, a lovely singer, and he had a marvellous sense of humour. He drank a lot, gave away a lot of money, of course, and unfortunately he befriended, I would imagine, a rather the wrong type of person for his own good. But he was always very colourful. A very colourful character, very gregarious, except of course in his more depressing moments when he'd drink a bit too much. But by and large, he had a great sense of humour, and he was quite colourful. And he was a bit depressed for a while in Limerick City until the great news came in one Monday morning that Alfred Hitchcock took an interest in his book he had written, and Alfred Hitchcock, or his agent, placed £10,000 in the Northern Bank for Sean. Because I know this, because Sean came in to me and presented me with a cheque for £100. Now, he didn't quite owe me £100, but he was very generous with money, of course. But he swore that day, this is my connection with Sean, that he would never again handle a chequebook, that he would draw the money as he wanted it, because he had gone through roughly, I think, between 40 and 50,000 pounds then, in a very short time.
One story amuses me, and I often think about it. It shows you Sean's obsession with, fixation with some happening. His spiritual home in Limerick, his local pub, was the Munster's Fair Tavern. It's still there, mind you, just across the road from St. Lawrence's graveyard, where the roads fork from Waterford to Tipperary. all and be all of Sean Burke's life. He tried as best he could, every kind of blandishment to Pat Carroll to soften the line to let Toddy back, but no. But eventually Sean's perseverance won the day, and after some months Pat Carroll allowed Toddy back to the pub. But that wasn't good enough for Sean at all. He wanted to celebrate the occasion in fitting style, so he hired a pipe band and a photographer, and he got Toddy and the band to assemble in the centre of Limerick. When he had one set of traffic lights, we called it traffic lights, at Todd's and Rochester's corners. And Mulgrave Street is a continuation of William Street, perhaps the longest street in Limerick. And it was a mile-long walk, and to set off, the band playing Toddy at the head of the band playing, Sean and friends marching behind the band, and they played away up William Street, up along Mulgrave Street, into the pub, and the photographer taking pictures the whole way. And they came into the pub then, and it was drinks on the house all night long. It was the very same as Sean had won as a sweep, or won the world title.
And then he would go off to booze, and he would take long walks around Mealy, and he would walk for 10 or 15 miles a day, but then he'd go back on the booze again. And I think as a result, except for a few very colourful articles he had written for Jim Kemmy's magazines, he didn't write a whole lot anyway. But he did keep in contact, of course, with people in England, because I often went to his flat in Jailbreaker Street, his old warehouse, and one evening we were having great fun. We actually tried him in a mock trial for murder. And the evening when the trial was over, we all got very drunk. Of course, Sean rang Scotland Yard, and the people in Scotland Yard, whoever we got onto it, they knew him quite well. They were on first name terms anyway, and they asked Sean would he like to call over and collect his old rover. It was still in the yard. So he had a great sense of humour also.
Of course, if he had put his foot inside the jurisdiction, he would have been charged and tried and probably jailed for aiding and abetting the release of...
Well, he checked that out, he told me, and certainly he would have got 7 years. You know, he did keep in contact, you know. He wasn't always kind of hazy from the booze. Nevertheless, he still had a very fine, active brain.
He could be mischievous, he could be very boyish in his pranks, but he could also be deep, complex man. He was a many-sided figure, Sean. Anti-establishment, difficult, morose, perverse, truculent. He was menacing without being violent. He was never physically violent. He was never a fighting man at all in that sense. He was driven on by demons. He had demons inside him that he couldn't control. And sometimes those demons got the better of him.
What was the nature of those demons?
I often try to work that out myself, because while I was a friend of his and very proud to have known Sean Burke, sometimes our relationship was stormy as well. And Sean Burke, he made friends slowly, but fell out very quickly, very easily. So our relationship was often touchy and often delicate and fragile, but still it persisted to the very end. I'm glad of that too, because I remember Sean with affection, and I often try to analyse him. I suppose it was his childhood really, his poverty in his childhood. The fact he was locked up for 11 years behind bars of one kind or another. He was in Dangan first of all, then Boston, and then in Warmers clubs. About 11 years in all. So that had an effect on his personality. And it was deeper than that too. Perhaps he had some mental disorders as well within him. And as a result of that, he couldn't live in peace with himself. A very talented man. He was a good writer, a masterly writer at times, the best typist I ever saw. He was a bricklayer, trained by Her Majesty, electrician as well he was, and learned other skills in prison. A highly intelligent man, good editor as well of the prison magazine, but unfortunately unhappy, tortured, tormented figure. Couldn't come to terms with himself.
I was born in Limerick by accident, because when my father and mother were going together, when they got married, there was no television in Limerick, thanks be to Christ, as a result of which I was born. If Limerick City tomorrow capsized under the weight of his own dirty, filthy hypocrisy into the River Shannon, I was never heard of again, I wouldn't shed a tear, Mr. Chairman.
I don't know if you're in a position...
And the world would have lost nothing!
This big front that he put up, he preferred himself. Basically, he was a very kind person, and he wouldn't put a word wrong, of course, when he was sober. But he was very frustrated and very, very confused toward the end, because he had this, he could write and write quite well, and he had a gift, of course, of the gift of the gab, if you like. And I feel that he knew deep down. Remember that Sean Burke used to, after a bout of drink, would stick his head into the toilet bowl for very often an hour in the morning time. You know, he would get a dry retching every morning, and he did tell me at one stage that he would rather cut his right hand off than ever drink again. But he eventually, of course, he broke out. But to my mind, this was laying heavily on him. He realised that he had a lot to offer, but he could not shake off the old booze.
What was the torment, though, that was deep in his nature? What was the source of that torment, did you ever ponder on?
Well, I would imagine, you know, knowing some people a bit like Sean, that it was certainly the term in going to being sent away to a farm school for a couple of bananas, I think it was, and then his time. And he swears he did not send a bomb in the post to the policeman in England. But I would imagine even before that, you know, he came from a large family. His father was fond of the jar as well, and they lived in this old warehouse in Jailbreaker Street, and I would imagine it all began there.
It was in the middle of October 1947 when I arrived at Dangan, and I was 12 and a half years of age. Absolute silence had to be maintained at all times. There was no heating in the wash house, and the ice was about a quarter-inch thick in the basins. I copied the other boys and broke the ice with a quick jab of the elbow before having a wash in the freezing water. Brother Hearn was supervising the wash house. He did this by standing in a wooden box. He was nicknamed the Killer. I found out why on that very first morning in Dangan. Some boy was heard to whisper to another at the end of the wash house. Brother Hearn went red in the face. If I catch the fellow that's talking, he won't be able to talk for a long time. Then he seemed to notice something. He jumped down off the box and ran to where the whisper had come from. He caught hold of a boy and proceeded to beat him methodically with his fist. He punched the boy in the face repeatedly until the boy's lip was split and his nose spurted blood. In his frenzy, Brother Ahern's crucifix worked its way loose from the belt of his cassock, and dangling from its neck cord jumped about in a grotesque dance as he carried out his attack on the terrified boy. Brother Ahern then resumed his position on the wooden box and glared up and down the wash houses. Ye scum of the earth, ye dirty, filthy, good-for-nothing scum of the earth, ye pack of robbers. Ye will be no loss to anyone when ye go back to the filthy, dirty hovels and the ignorant, illiterate fathers and mothers that ye come from. From the wash house we were marched once more through the snow and the darkness to the chapel for Mass.
He didn't like somebody who was perhaps his match in intelligence and wouldn't perhaps take some of his assertions and some of his statements, which were forthright always, but sometimes would be wrong and perverse, and he didn't like that. You could fall out with him easily in drink. He would drink an awful lot. Sometimes he would drink 2 and 3 bottles of whiskey a day. And my abiding memory of Sean is of the markets area of Limerick. Sean would be up early in the morning, and you would see him perhaps at times going to work. You might meet him yourselves later on that day. And sometimes he would be the worst of wear, far wear, after a bout of drinking all day. And that's where he got into trouble with himself, with the law, and with other people, because the drink had a bad effect on him. When he was sober, he was a different person.
When you were a fledgling politician in Limerick and hardly known nationally, Sean Burke threw in his lot, so to speak, with you.
He did. Way back in 1977, when I stood for the Dáil for the first time, Sean Burke gave me the biggest financial contribution I ever got to my campaign fund. He gave me £200. I gave him back, I suppose, that amount afterwards, but I would certainly say one thing. Sean Burke was a very proud man. Sean Burke gave away a fortune. He spent the best part of £100,000 in Limerick in the years. He paid light bills, he paid rent, he paid all sorts of other council people, and he didn't ever borrow money from anybody. He was very careful about who he would ask for money. I can assure you of that. And he gave me £200 then. He also put his typing skills at my disposal in a number of elections. and was very helpful to me and very generous. And while he was not a socialist by any means, he was anti-establishment, he was a radical, he was a wayward maverick in society. Nevertheless, he had a fellow feeling of spirit with me.
How did he feel when you went into the Dáil?
Well, he was proud of that, mind you. He was very proud of the fact I got to the Dáil. He didn't think I'd ever do it, mind you. He didn't think I'd ever do it. He thought I was wasting my time. I often said so as well in some of his blacker moments. He thought I was wasting my time. That perhaps the people of Limerick didn't deserve all this kind of hard work.
What would he say to you?
I said, you'll never get it at all. The people will not respond to what you're talking about and saying, you're right, of course. I agree with you, but I don't think you'll succeed in what you're doing. You're better off not to get too involved in this. You're wasting your time. You're better off to take up some other pursuits. He would discourage me gently and very half-heartedly as well. He knew he was wasting his time, but he was a bit cynical perhaps sometimes about people. Even though he spent his time amongst the down-and-outs, downtrodden, nevertheless he had a kind of love-hate relationship for them and for the people of Limerick. He hated journalists, of course. He hated journalists very much, and he didn't like the police either. Mind you, one of the saddest things I ever saw was Sean was in hospital for a while, in St. Joseph's Hospital. He had some sort of breakdown. He was trying to get off the drink, and he broke out one day. And he was, instead of going back to the hospital, he went up outside the prison, directing traffic in the middle of the streets. He often did this, and he was naturally arrested by the police because it was a high security prison in Limerick, and there were squad cars going around all the time. So Sean was bundled unceremoniously into a squad car. He was taken up to Edward Street police station. It was a lovely Saturday evening, summer's evening, and I got word of it at 7 o'clock that Sean was inside in the prison, inside in the police station. So I was very unhappy about this. I was going off to have a few drinks that night after the week's work, and I thought of Sean lying down in a dirty, filthy cell. It was more than I could stand, so up I went to the station, and I went in, and the sergeant on duty wasn't very cordial towards me. He was reluctant to let Sean out and into my care. He said, could I guarantee that Sean wouldn't get into trouble again, which was rather a tall order from me. I told him I couldn't guarantee him that I would be alive in the morning, but I would guarantee him that if he let Sean go into my care, that I would see he was taken back to hospital again, and I would escort him back personally. So after some argy-bargy, he agreed to leave him into my care rather reluctantly. So I took Sean back. I went down to the cell to get him out, and I was very sad to see him thrown down like that. And also it struck me that Sean had become institutionalized, because he was thrown down in filthy cell, terrible surroundings, and it really wounded me terribly, pained me terribly. I couldn't tell you how deeply I felt and how shocked I was to see poor Sean thrown down on the ground in vomit and filth of all indescribable sort. So, come on, Sean, I said, cheer up, we're going out of here. So he packed up immediately and came with me, and I was cheerful to the police leaving as well, passed a few wisecracks, and I marched him down again into St. Joseph's Hospital, and he went in a very docile way. He didn't make any protests at all. He went straight into the hospital as well, into an observation unit ward. And I felt terribly sorry about that, see poor Sean. I went off at the night, and there he was locked away after going from one institution to another. So that's the kind of fellow Sean was. He had been burdened like that, and he didn't really care too much. He was irresponsible. He had been steeled in the fires of life.
From the fire to the sea, with his options narrowing yet again, with no sign of the promised second book being delivered, with 5 years of dissipation in Limerick, and in the grip of something that none of his friends could really understand, Burke went to Kilkee out on the Atlantic coast. Limerick's watering hole, but a place he had never had a holiday in, unlike most Limerick people. Why? To attempt a childhood he never had? To try and write? Because he was too proud to stay on in Limerick moneyless? Because the weight of his own contradictions were bowing him down, the socialist who was unable to live in Russia, the Anglophile who had dealt a blow to the British establishment, the man of action who was now sunk into sloth, the he-man who had come to the notice of the Gardaí for homosexual activity. Who can tell what the contradictions were? Who knows? In the run of his life, the water was rising to close the eyes of the bridge.
Well, my name is Larry Collins. I'm a native of Kilkee, although I spent many years overseas. I first came home from the States. I had a bar, and then I opened the Carbon Park, and I sold the bar. So in the afternoons I used to go for a walk around the beach in Kilkee, stop off at the Royal Marine Hotel for a drink on my way home. And nearly every evening when I went to the Marine, Sean Burke was always sitting at the counter. So after a few evenings we got to say hello or hi, and that's how I got to know Sean Burke.
What did you make of him?
Well, to me he was always very polite, very pleasant. He never was rough, just never interfered with anybody. If you spoke to Sean, he spoke to you. Otherwise, he did not speak to you.
Civilized now.
Oh yes, very, very civilized, very well mannered. Sean lived in a mobile home at the old railway station, Kilkee. And I'd say when Sean had not money, he went walking every day. He used to walk to Kilrush, about 8 miles to Kilrush and 8 miles back. And sometimes he'd go to Quern. So I often asked him who used to meet on the road. So he used to tell me that he was writing a book at the time, and he used to say the passages out loud. And he used to have a great laugh because he thought the local people would be thinking he was crazy. But he was reciting the passages to the new book about his prison in England.
And he used to walk this road. Now, did you often pass him on the road?
Oh, I often passed Sean many, many times on the road. He always had a walking stick, and he borrowed a neighbour's brown dog for company. But I say the only time Sean went for a walk was when he was short of money.
Otherwise he'd be in the pub.
Otherwise he was in the pub. But he was a very expensive man in a pub. I never had a drink with Sean because his drinks were too expensive for me. Sean never had anything less than a large one.
And would he take something back with him?
Well, of course, when Sean was leaving the pub to go home at night, he'd always bring his quart with him. Because Sean would say he'd wake up about 3 in the morning and he'd have to have a drop.
He had the horrors at 3 in the morning.
Well, I won't say the horrors at 3 in the morning.
Loneliness, maybe.
Probably loneliness. It was about 5:10 in the evening. I was going out for a walk. And I saw my friend Paddy Stapleton. He's a mechanic in Kilkee at a local garage, called me. He was leaning over a body on the side of the road. I just went over to have a look, and then I discovered it was Sean Burke. And then a few more neighbours gathered around, and somebody asked, was there a doctor called? So I went into my own house and I called the doctor, which I think somebody else had already phoned for one. A short time afterwards, Dr. Mangan arrived, and he worked on him at the corner for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then he decided that he'd be better to remove him to a house. So I decided to leave him into my house. So they got some kind of a board, and they put him on it and took him into the house. And a short time afterwards, Dr. Nolan arrived, and the 2 doctors, well, until Sean died about 7:20 that evening, the 2 of them worked non-stop on him. They pumped his chest, shoved needles here on him. But to me, Sean never opened his eyes.
Was he bleeding?
Oh, Sean was breathing very, very heavy and fighting very, very heavy. Fighting very heavy. But I don't think he knew what was happening.
Was he uttering sounds?
I was just muttering, just fighting very hard. And about 10 minutes before he died, the local ambulance arrived, and they just went in, and the nurse came in, the attendant came in. So Sean died, so they just that was the end.
When you went to the caravan, the mobile home, what did you see?
Well, the local Gardaí were also present when Sean died, or during the 2 hours he was in the house with me. So they said that they just wanted to see was there any valuables on him. So I was a witness, being a civilian. So we just searched Sean, and all we got on him was the keys of the mobile home and just a few pence. Then they asked me would I go to his mobile home with them to see was there any valuables in the mobile. So we proceeded to the mobile, and in the mobile we just could find nothing. There was a canvas cover to keep out the rain over half it. And his own little cubicle was tidy, very small, nothing in it, just clean clothes, clean underwear, a couple of clean shirts, a few papers thrown around, a few books in different languages, his own book in different languages. But to me there was nothing else.
Did you ever know him to have a manuscript or to be working on a manuscript?
Well, Sean always said that he was writing one, because he used to spend a lot of his time in one of the beach shelters with his typewriter typing. So I believe he did have one.
But there was no sign of it in the mobile home?
Definitely not.
Could anybody else have gotten into the mobile home that morning when he was out?
No. Nobody. I doubt it very much, because why would anyone want to break into a mobile? It was just a padlock that was on the door of the mobile.
And it was locked when you got it?
With the Gardaí arrived with me, they opened it, and I went in to be a witness that they did not take anything from it. And there was nothing in the mobile. There was nothing to take.
Well, I was at the inquest, and I was expecting some very dramatic things from the coroner, you see, and when the evidence, all the evidence was heard, of course, there was a jury of 5 men, I think, and 4 women. The evidence was very simple. He collapsed in Kilkee and he died on his way to Ennis Hospital. But they certainly, the coroner would definitely say that there were no great traces of alcohol in his blood, certainly no trace of drugs. And he did make reference, he spoke to the body of the court, and he directed his remarks to the journalist to take note of that in view of all the rumour on the paper about the death of Sean Burke and the possibility that he was seen to by the CIA or the KGB. Certainly they found nothing in him except that his lungs will be getting trouble. He had bronchitis. His lungs were in a bad state, and he didn't smoke, of course, and he didn't drink for days before he died, because I know this for a fact he didn't have any money. Sean Burke didn't drink for 4 or 5 days before he died, and it certainly the drink may have contributed a certain amount, and there was a mention of a lack of food, that he hadn't eaten, and I do know this for a fact, because when some people went to visit the caravan in Kilkee, there was nothing there except a half loaf of dry bread and a few tea bags, and no traces of. And Sean, of course, didn't have hot water in the caravan, and he was just sleeping in a sleeping bag and 1 blanket.
And it was winter?
It was winter and very cold in Kilkee. So I would imagine that contributed to Sean's.
Why was there this question mark over his death? Why did people say or assume that he may have been exterminated with extreme prejudice by either the KGB or
well, there was always the hint that Sean knew a little more than he pretended to know, and some people think that maybe he was knocked off because he had some correspondence going, I believe, with somebody in England anyway, and it was suspect, and Sean knew a lot, of course. But he didn't talk a lot, but maybe he must have had mention in some pubs. Occasionally he would slip, but he'd never say a lot about the swinging of Blake or some of the people in England, but occasionally he did mention some high-ranking people in England he had known. So maybe that's where the suspicion came from.
High-ranking people who were involved in the backup group to the
Possibly,
escape.
yeah.
Was it said locally at all that in his later years and with the depths of the despair he plummeted, that he was writing to England asking for money and threatening that if he didn't get paid certain amounts to keep him going, he would reveal the names of people in the British establishment who were involved in the swinging?
Yeah, well, that was a rumour that I heard anyway. I heard that rumour myself. But how valid it is, I don't know. Because Sean was, in many ways, although I do know that he was in a bad state at the end, but he was quite discreet as well. I would imagine he would have waited for a while, before he would have revealed anything.
We raised that here only to lay it. Sean Burke died from natural causes. That is the view of the two doctors who attended him at his death. It is the view of another specialist at Baggett's Hospital in Limerick who performed an autopsy, which is a detailed examination of the internal organs, and it is also the view of the Clare coroner, Dr. Tom Daly. For ethical reasons, these doctors are unable to give their testimony on tape, but that is their considered judgment. For the record, Sean Burke's death certificate reads for January 26, 1982. Cause of death: acute pulmonary edema, coronary thrombosis, certified.
I don't agree with the theory that he was got at down there. I think he died of natural causes. Because don't forget, even though he was only 47 years of age, he had wrecked himself. He had never taken any precautions with his health. And he got a stroke, I would say, of sorts. He died fairly soon afterwards. And he had £1 and 4 pennies in his pocket. And when his brother came from Scotland to see him, his head closed, he stood up and only. That's all he had. And also inside the caravan, there was a quarter of a bottle of milk and about half a loaf of bread, and nothing else. And £1, 4 pennies in his pocket of his trousers. But he died, of course, to have a drink in his memory with his friends at Munster Fair Tavern, and I did that. I went into the Munster Fair Tavern, even if it was during the general election campaign, I could never forget it. It was the day the government came down in January 1982, and I got the news that morning that Sean had died, and really it was a cast-an-omen over the whole proceedings that were to follow in Leicester House. So I hadn't forgotten my wish, Sean's wish, that I would honour it by having a drink in the Munster Fair Tavern on that day. So I came down from Dublin, and even if it was during the campaign, we took time off to bury Sean. And all we did afterwards to the Munster Fair Tavern, and we drank to Sean's health.
You take, for instance, a funny side of his life. Walked into a bank in William Street and handed a girl a black bag and said, "Excuse me, darling, I have a gun. Would you put £10,000 into that bag, please? I use it." So, he was arrested. He was a zany character. 4 days later on, he tapped the drink magic van in William Street, and the little hatch where they put the money in, he tapped the hatch. He said, "Excuse me, old chap," he said, "would you mind filling that bag?" So, Sean, you can never know when you have it. Very, very few people, to my mind, got inside Sean Burke. Very, very few. There was something eating away at that man, gnawing away, and I have a feeling that he never wanted to drink. He never wanted to be a deviant. He basically wanted to be a normal man, and he had difficulty in being normal. Normal in the sense that he wanted to drink normally, he wanted to behave normally. He led a very sad life at the end. So basically, I think he wanted to be, he was playing a game. That's the impression I got from Sean. Sean Burke was basically an honourable, decent, upright man. But unfortunately, the booze beat him.
Michael calling Baker Crowley. Fox Michael calling Baker Crowley. Come in, please. Over. Baker Crowley calling Fox Michael. Baker Crowley calling Fox Michael. Can you hear me? Come in, please. So I'm here with another prison late and I haven't died the cage. Over. I am still sending cracks. Over. Richard Lovelace must have been a fool. Over. Over. Well, I must find out because the first question I've asked you is this. Did you receive the tools? And if so, are they suitable? Over. Only the handle side here of the couple. But most of what is said wasn't there. The rest at the moment. Over. Well, this is very regrettable. I'm leaving him again tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. That's the earliest I can discover why you haven't had him. Over.
Among the contributors to A Death in January were Joe Malone, Jim Kemmy and Larry Collins. The programme was presented and produced by Kevin O'Connor. Sound supervision was by Paddy Chute. You can hear a repeat of A Death in January on Thursday evening, the 26th of January, which incidentally is the second anniversary of Sean Burke's death. The repeat can be heard on Radio 1 medium wave and VHF at 9:15. Well, I hope you enjoyed our programmes on Radio 1 VHF this morning.